let's say Jed Hoyer is on the hot seat and knows he's on the hot seat, right? It's at least reasonable to believe that sticking the course, staying the course, and just doing all these things that he has done well, stay on that track and see it through to the end for your next employer.
All right, Cubs fans, this is a really fun conversation I had with Michael Cerami. And before we get to it, I want to ask you if you want to be my co-host on The Setup Man. Here's the deal, guys. I have been doing this for a year now. I've been having a ton of fun. But I'll be honest, having a conversation with just myself, it gets a little bit lonely. I feel like I'm on an island out here, but I'm going to let you know right now, I'm going to be really extremely particular with who I allow to be that person. I'm going to be very, very picky because at the end of the day, I want this to be the best show out there talking about Cubs on a daily basis. And so that person that's going to be right there with me, I want to make sure that you're the right fit for our audience as well. So if you're serious about that, if you want to be considered for that role, whether you're listening on the podcast or watching on YouTube right now, in the description down below is an application that you can fill out. I would love to see you fill that out, and then I will reach out to you if I think that you would be a potentially good fit. And really, really think about it, right? Think about it for a second. Like, do I actually want to commit to that? Do I have the time? Do I have the dedication? Do I have the desire? Do I love the Cubs with all my being? If that's you, then go ahead and fill out that application. But let's get to it right now with Michael Cerami talking all things offseason here on The Setup Man. Hey, what's up, Setup Nation? We have, speaking of Nation, we have Bleacher Nation right now. It's Michael Cerami with Bleacher Nation. Michael, really excited to have this conversation today, man. And just I want to give some praise to you as well. I've been looking at a lot of your articles over the last couple of years, especially I've been building up our channel. And my hope today, was just, hey, let's just go have a good baseball conversation with a guy who knows the team really well and isn't going to be biased, I don't need to script everything out. We can just go and have a good conversation. And you were the first person I thought of, and I don't know why, but here you are. And I'm excited to have that conversation with you.
Oh, well, I'm sorry to tell you, I've been targeting ads directly to you just to make it seem like I have that sort of, aura around. No, I appreciate that.
You're a Cardinals fan, right?
Yeah, I'm actually a Cardinals fan. I'm undercover. There is an old picture of me floating around the internet of Little League in a Cardinals uniform, and the commenters on Bleacher Nation will post it every now and then. When I have a take they don't like I'm a undercover Cardinals fan or agent. But no, I appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to chatting.
Don't tell my wife, but there's one of those kind of photos going around of me wearing Dodgers attire, and she's a big Dodgers fan, and I would never hear the end of it if she ever found that one. Well, hey, man, first of all, let's just talk about Bleacher Nation for a second, because you guys deserve all the props that you get. I had Brett on last year. We had a great conversation, actually, during the season. But how much fun is it working at Bleacher Nation and knowing, you guys do a phenomenal job. So just being a part of something big like that, that's got to be fun.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And I think for us, the best part is just, Brett started it, and then it was one thing for a while, and then I came on board, and we sort of changed the vision of what it could be. And by the point of what I'm trying to say here is the people we've hired along the way are kind of what makes it so fun, especially because most of the I wasn't a writer by trade or a journalist by education or anything like that. Neither was Brett. Patrick, who's writing about the Bears a lot, was working at UPS, I think. And Eli came straight out of college. And I guess what I'm getting at is I like that we built something that's got a voice and an impact without having to be this traditional media brand that just does things the same way everyone does. And so that's kind of been the best part, is just all the people that I get to work with every day.
That's awesome, man. Well, let's dive into it. And I think where I want to start here is, you see it on your screen. What is Jed's plan for the 2024-25 offseason? You and I were kind of talking right before I hit record. I know that vibes in this offseason are a lot lower than vibes going into last offseason, right? There was first base to fill. There was the excitement of PCA coming up until Cade Horton got hurt. We all thought that he was going to make a big impact on the team. And so there was a lot of things, aside from the fact that also, Christopher Morel was finally going to get a real shot at third base. there was a lot of things going into the 2024 season that had us really excited, even though there wasn't, call it the big signing aside from Cody Bellinger, who just re-signed. This year, it feels like, man, this impacted lineup, which I already had a conversation with Boog about, is really kind of like going to pigeonhole some things. But there is a lot of talk about starting pitching, and there's not a lot of talk about the bullpen, unfortunately, because I think that is a place that we can see some moves. But I guess where I want to go with this is I'm in the camp of I am just holding out because I think this is Jed's last year, at least for now, on contract, and he has to do something to make a splash and to get Tom to be like, okay, this guy's worth keeping around. That I come from that camp right now, at least. There's some things in the back of my mind that we can bring up here in a little bit, but like where do you think is your mind like in the same spot, or do you just think, man, it's going to be interesting to look at this offseason because there's just not many moves that can be made?
Yeah, so I definitely take the gist here. So I have a few thoughts. One, I think last year a lot of the excitement, that one of the points that you didn't mention there was the surprise signing of Craig Counsell that really catapulted us into like, oh my God, they might be about to do something. 50%. The other 50%, us being like, holy cow, the Cubs are able to completely quietly pull off this insanely big move. Ignore the impact what it did or didn't have. That was a huge deal at the time. When it happened, we were like, what? Not just getting rid of David Ross, that was always theoretically on the table, but signing Craig Counsell, signing him to the biggest deal for a manager, and also not appearing in even a single rumor. I mean, it was like he's either going to the Mets to reunite with David Stearns when Stearns takes over, or sticking in Milwaukee. I mean, nobody. I think there was a Cleveland Guardians rumor too. Nobody had the Cubs on the radar at all, and that sort of made it a little bit more exciting. When in reality, this year, I think you nailed it, that there is way less room in terms of the roster to make an impact without first subtracting, which I do think is going to be on the table and has already been discussed. But there is still some exciting things. I mean, to be fair, like we're about to see a full season of Pete Crow-Armstrong, which I think is going to be awesome. We're going to see a full season of, or at least we had a full season, but a second season where growth can be more easily obtained, I hope, of Michael Busch at first base. I would say that I'm guessing Jed Hoyer is going to say, and I wouldn't say this, but it's going to come out at some point, that Isaac Paredes, excuse me, was the start of their offseason, acquisition, because they got him at the mid, halfway through the year, and they think he'll have a stronger season, which is a fine bet. But right there, you have three players that over the course of a full season should be improvements on what the Cubs had last year. I also think Cody Bellinger, if he makes it through the offseason untraded, which seems like a good bet, he'll immediately improve the right field defense for the Cubs significantly. And also let Seiya Suzuki DH most of the time, which should keep him healthier and more productive. So like, just at a fundamental level, the excitement isn't there because a lot of the stuff that I just pointed to as like reasons for optimism is stuff we all kind of have internalized already. We all know all of those things. It's just that when you list it, you actually go like, oh, I guess, yeah, they might not be terrible. It's just, that's not exciting. That's not fun. And it still feels to me like they're missing impact, which brings us to your question. What is his plan? Add impact. And I think the only way to do that is in the rotation. But if you're asking me if Jed Hoyer is going to make a splash to not save his job, because I don't want to put words in your mouth to make it sound more dramatic, because I know that's not exactly what you were saying. But no, I don't think so. I don't think he's ever going to operate with that sort of mentality. And I think that for two reasons. One, I just don't think that's how he operates. I think that's fundamentally, he doesn't think it's the best way to build a team. And two, though, and this is more of my, conspiratorial, put a tinfoil hat on. Let's say Jed Hoyer is on the hot seat and knows he's on the hot seat, right? And he knows that if he doesn't do something big, or if the Cubs don't go out and make the playoffs, he'll be let go, or he won't be extended. His contract is up after this year. Sure. It's at least reasonable to believe in terms of your long-term, career goals, that sticking the course, staying the course, and just doing all these things that he has done well, which is like building up a farm system, building up an organization that is vastly superior on the scouting and development and pitching development and the minor league system side of the organization. Basically everything besides building a big league team, Jed Hoyer is pretty good at. It's probably at least worthwhile to demonstrate your ability to stay on that track and see it through to the end for your next employer, because for all we know, there's the next version of the Boston Red Sox hiring Bloom to do their little mini reset and rebuild and reorganizational overhaul. And there could be another team out there that's a big market team that wants to redo everything. And guess what? Jed Hoyer just became available and he does a good job at that. And then in 5 years or whatever, when we want to flip the switch, we could go ahead and make a change if we feel that's necessary. But in the meantime, we know that this guy is going to, spend conservatively and build up, wisely on the foundational elements of an organization. So that's why I don't think he's going to be motivated by those sort of like outside pressures.
So that's where, when you talk about the way that he's built this up, right, and then what's actually been implemented, it feels like he's got this plan, but he doesn't really know what to do once it's time to like take that to the finish line. And I'll give you a few examples. I fully expected to see Owen Casey at some point in 2024. He started in AAA. He ended in AAA. He had a really good season. I fully expected to see Moises Ballesteros at some point. And I know there was some 40-man implications and all those kinds of things, and that's fine. I get that. But why build up this really good farm system if you're not going to at least get some of the experiments out there? And I heard it put really well. I think Sam was talking about Locked On the other day, where it's just like, hey, like I want to see PCA up and making those mistakes on day one or week one, not in mid-May where there's more pressure on him and now the team has to win. And I think that's the core of the question is like, Christopher Morel, I've mentioned it before, in 2022, 2023, had every chance to play third base. He didn't. They forced him to try that in 2024 when it's like, quote unquote, we're in our winning window now. It just feels like the timing of a lot of this is weird. And it almost makes me wonder, like, are these just going to be chips for trades and not actually ever come to fruition in the majors?
Yeah. I mean, I think that each player has like their individual circumstance. Like Owen Casey, yeah, I think it could have made sense for him to play. Ballesteros, I don't think it would have, not just for the rostering reasons, but because of his age. And, he didn't actually destroy AAA. He held his own and is more than, his bat is a legitimate, weapon. Like that's going to be something, but I'm not surprised they didn't call up a 20-year-old who could pretty much only DH. Owen Casey, though, yeah, sure, especially because he had to be added to the 40-man. I think he will be tomorrow. Anyway, it seems reasonable, but at the same time, you look then at the big league roster and you have Ian Happ having a career year, Seiya Suzuki having a career year, and Cody Bellinger and Michael Busch were around and PCA was playing. So where is he going to play? But that's kind of to your point. It's like, well, what are you guys doing? And I suspect that I will be shocked. I would be shocked if there's not at least one talent consolidating trade made by the Cubs this offseason. Most likely that trade will be for a pitcher. I do think it would, I'm sure they would love to get, Vladito, but I don't think he's going to be available necessarily. I mean, I think everyone seems to hope that's the case, but it doesn't seem like the Blue Jays are all that interested in moving him. So I do think it'll end up being for a pitcher, and it'll probably include some collection of those AAA top 100 prospects. And again, we also have what's his name, Cam Smith at AA already. Yeah. So like it's about to get even more crowded. So yeah, there's no way that all of those guys make it through the offseason. And that will be a very big deal for Jed Hoyer, and that'll be a very big trade that should impact 2025. That should be a talent consolidating trade where we open up, opportunities for other prospects and then add impact. And again, the only place that I see really plausible is the rotation.
Yeah. And I think you said something that was really kind of clicking for me right now. If you think about all the trades that have been made recently, Isak Paredes, Michael Bush, and signings as well, Craig Counsell, there were zero rumors about any of those. Yeah, we've got
true.
all sorts of rumors in the last couple of years about Pete Alonso, Vlad Guerrero. Who else? Tyler Glass now, right? Like all these things that, these
Reese
are going to
Hoskins. Hoskins was another one that everyone said the Cubs were going to get. Yeah.
Shane Bieber, right? They were all these are done deals, right? Like these are going to happen, and none of them happen. But then all these things, and I think that's why, going back to my original question, I hold out this hope of like the rumors just never seem to actually come to fruition. But then it's just all these surprise moves that do end up being pretty impactful. And I would say maybe even the closest that we were even thinking the Cubs were considering was Shota Imanaga, but I don't even think that. I don't even think that was like ever one of those signs that we were like, oh yeah, Cubs are getting Shota Imanaga. It was like, yeah, they might be one of three teams. But
yeah, that was definitely the closest of all the ones that you just listed. But you're right. I mean, Paredes, no one had the Cubs on the radar, mostly because we didn't think that they would be quote unquote buying, whatever you want to call that. But again, I mean, and man, what a weird move that is in retrospect, even though, right? Because like, I like Paredes, and I think he probably will be pretty good this coming year. But had you traded Morel, if Morel has some value, or Morel plus prospects has some value, enough to get Paredes, who was a pretty highly sought after trade chip, right? So there was obviously some value given up by the Cubs there. Then you could have traded him for a non-infielder and then not had the Matt Shaw, issue already. You know what I mean? But instead they did, and just reshuffled the problem with a different player. And, I think theoretically Paredes has a much higher floor than Morel, but I also think Morel has a higher ceiling.
I do too. Yeah.
So we'll see what happens. I think it was probably a fine trade, but that, I don't know. That's a very strange one. And again, it didn't alleviate the problem. It just sort of was like, you like this lottery ticket? Well, here's this one with slightly better odds, but a lower payout. And that's what we did. We switched to questions.
And I'll tell you this though, after that trade was made and you're reshuffling the deck, as you said, I would much rather go into 2025 with Isak Paredes starting at third base, because I know a lot of people are talking about, oh, well, we should trade him. We should, find value for him. We should get it. Then Matt Shaw starting on day one at third base and having all that kind of pressure. And then May comes around and we're like, okay, it's 3 months in a row now of Paredes not hitting, and he's still having some struggles at third base. Matt Shaw is tearing the cover off the ball at AAA. It's time to give him a shot at third base, and we're gonna, ease him in. And then if Matt Shaw takes over and looks like a dude, what do? You DFA Paredes, because it's what, $6 million, maybe $8 million in arbitration. To me, it's like the easiest way to go into 2025 feeling like Matt Shaw has a shot without putting all the pressure on him, and also not having to rely on quote unquote like a Patrick Wisdom or Miles Mastroboni at third base. I don't want to go down that route.
Yeah, so I think a couple things. I think it's extremely unlikely that the Cubs trade Paredes. I think they just got him because they want him. It's not even based on what anything I've heard. That's my read on it. They targeted him and they wanted him. And we know that they targeted him last offseason as well. And I think at the time, Morel was part of those trade talks and they weren't ready to move on from Morel yet, which I actually understand. I mean, the upside of Morel was like tantalizing. It was like right there. Yeah. So I get that, but I think that they got him because they want him. So for whatever that's worth. The sort of to your point though, and where I'll slightly disagree is that I think Matt Shaw, I think there's some real value in having Matt Shaw up on day one, if not for the performative reasons, but because of the chance that he can net the Cubs additional draft picks by winning Rookie of the Year or receiving MVP votes, whatever those things are, those new CBA rules, because he will be on all the top 100 prospects lists, thereby qualifying for those extra picks. So, but I think it's not going to happen at third base. I think it'll happen at second base, where I think Nico Horner probably won't be ready at the start of the season. And so you can have Matt Shaw sort of start that way. And in that sense, you can maybe kill two birds with one stone, because you can say, hey, it kind of like PCA in a sense, when he came up this last season, where it's like, hey, Matt Shaw, like, you're up for now, but it's just while Nico is out for the next 2.5 weeks, whatever it'll take. And even if you are amazing, you're going to go back down, like, totally, wink, wink. And then if he's great, then you don't have to worry about it. And
Exactly.
you could filter people in. And if he's not, then you'd be like, yeah, see, it's your AAA. And when your time comes, you come, and then you satisfy the opening day rule and on the roster, and you don't necessarily have to commit to him right away. And that's all assuming that Nico Horner makes it through the offseason untraded, which I think the Cubs would be thrilled. I think the Cubs love Nico Horner. I also think they would trade him if they could. And I also think that he's not going to get traded while the uncertainty surrounding his arm surgery is outstanding. So until people see him play, I just don't think he's going to be dealt.
Yeah, well, and let's just address that for a second, because anytime I talk about Nico Horner getting traded, like, half of Cubs fans lose their mind, including, like, I don't want Nico Horner to get traded. He's my favorite player. He's one of the best contact guys on the team. He's one of the best gloves on the team. There's so many good things to talk about. But when going back to what you said, ceiling and floors, Nico has a really high floor. We don't necessarily know what Matt Shaw's floor is at this time, but I think everyone can agree from an offensive standpoint, the ceiling on Matt Shaw is the most exciting profile in the minor leagues. Maybe Moises Ballesteros is next to him, maybe Owen Casey next to him, but I think Matt Shaw is going to be one of those guys that you're like, holy cow, like, this can be a middle of the bat lineup, and Nico's just never going to be that guy.
No, yeah, I completely agree with everything you just said. I think that we sometimes even, or maybe it's just appropriately valued, because yeah, Nico is obviously such a fan favorite. And then, his offensive production doesn't really warrant that. It's just the type that is often exciting.
Yep.
and less infuriating, because he does put the ball in play, and he does run really, really well. Steals, I think he stole over 70 bases the last 2 years combined. The Cubs don't have guys like that very often. And then on top of that, he's just a superb defender up the middle, and can backfill shortstop as needed, which is obviously a very important thing as well. Shaw is, the likely better overall player, probably because his offensive upside is just much more significant. You're right. So I think that I would also, I don't want to see Nico Horner traded, but at the same time, he's like an amazing sixth best player on a team, and he's like our third best player, and that can't happen. Like,
No.
You know what I mean? And I know that's not his fault. It's not, honestly, it's not too dissimilar from Ian Happ. Like, Ian Happ is a great player. Like, I think it's, and in a weird way, Nico gets all the love and Ian doesn't get nearly enough relative to what they both offer the team. But it's like, these are all great, like, excellent supporting cast mates, and you need, a star. And the problem is Ian Happ has a no trade clause, makes more money, and is a left fielder. Whereas Nico Horner is younger, makes less money, and doesn't have no trade clause. So you can move one of them and you can't move the other, and you need to move somebody, either to make room for a Matt Shaw or an Owen Casey or a Kevin Alcantara or whomever. And there's one guy that's movable. But all of this is blown up by the fact that his surgery makes him,
I know,
almost nearly unmovable.
Yep.
So I don't know.
So let me ask you a question. We're talking about bold, and Jed, you don't believe that he will be bold. I don't. I'm not saying I believe he will, but I'm just saying I think that with the surprises that we've seen over the last couple of years, it wouldn't surprise me if he does something really bold. And I want to give you a scenario. Which one would you be more surprised by? If Jed went out there, and I think 2 weeks ago, it felt like Max Fried was a guy that was on the radar. Now, I don't know. You tell me. I'm more like, that's like a 10% chance they actually get Max Fried based on all the rumors now. Are we on the same page on that?
Yep.
Yeah. So what's more surprising, that he would go and spend AAV over 25 million on another quote unquote star, or that he would trade away, let's just say Bellinger and Horner, and hey, your starting right fielder is Owen Casey, and your starting second baseman on opening day is Matt Shaw. And maybe even take it one step further and say that Parade is gone and he goes and gets a different third baseman, or even moves over Shaw to third and James Toronto's at second. I guess my point is, would you be more surprised by a really big signing, or more surprised by offloading some of the payroll and saying we're going all in on the prospects now?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay. The problem is, I think there's two ways to look at that. It's what would Jed Hoyer prefer to do, and what is more realistic. Um, because those are very different things, I think. And so I think 2 weeks ago, I would have said, I think they're going to sign Max Fried. Like, I think that's where I would have gone. Now I think what I think is the plan is they're going to target someone like Walker Buehler, Shane Bieber, Nathan Eovaldi, Sean Manaea, one of those. I know Bieber and Bueller are a little different because they're more bounce backy, but a mid-tier starter, someone that does project to be in their starting rotation, but isn't necessarily like a top of the rotation guy. I think they're going to sign someone like that, maybe a 16, 17 million AAV type of pitcher, and then trade for a more impactful top of the rotation starter. That's where I see their the way that they will allocate the resources this offseason.
Okay.
Whereas they could alternatively sign the more expensive pitcher and then trade lesser prospects for, a back of the rotation guy. But I think it's the opposite. I think the bigger thing will happen via trade with prospects, and the smaller thing will happen via free agency.
So I read your article about Bueller being on their radar. And I know you said, hey, if Bueller's the only guy, this isn't, Michael's not happy. But what I'm hearing now from you is you think there will be a second starter, and you're thinking it'll come through trade. Are you like pretty steadfast in that thought, or is that just what you're hoping for?
That is what I expect them to do. So I'm trying to, tread lightly on things that I've heard and things that I just think. And also sometimes those things sort of cross, and you start to believe the things that you know what I mean? And you start to get, but that is what I expect will happen. I suspect the Cubs will make a trade for an impact starting pitcher. But I don't want this to be misconstrued either as them going out and getting a literal ace, because that just doesn't happen very often. But if you could get someone in the 2, 3, top to mid range, and then you sign someone like Bueller or whomever as like a let's roll the dice and see what happens, kind of like a la Cody Bellinger.
Yes.
It's like, yeah, sometimes you catch lightning in the bottle, and maybe he doesn't stay long term. Obviously, Bellinger is sort of, but but for that 1 year, you got 2023 Cody Bellinger, and that was awesome. And he was the Cubs' best player that year, so like that can happen. Walker Buehler has that in him. It's just absolutely not something you can count on. Just like anyone, nobody was counting on Cody Bellinger going into 2023. No one saw that coming. It was like, hey, if he turns it around, great. No one expected him to be like an all-star caliber player again, worthy of an $80 million contract a year later. So that's why I'm like, with Bueller, it's like, listen, I get the idea. I get the logic. I'm behind it. Let's do that. But if you do that, you need to also do the thing that raises our floor and makes it, more likely to succeed, because he is a complete unknown, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, well, you know how much Jed loves the reclamation projects too. That's why I also think maybe even like a Clay Holmes would be on the radar. We've even heard that Nate Pearson might have a shot at making the rotation, right? Which, doesn't really matter what we think about that. I want to talk about who's not on the team right now. So let me ask you this. When you talk about Walker Buehler plus maybe a trade, I don't need a name that you think will actually be a trade candidate, but what kind of pitcher, name me a couple names of like, this is the kind of guy I would see in that trade coming to the Cubs, just as a template of the type of pitcher you could imagine.
Sure. I mean, so I think I'll take the easy route here, because there's even been some sort of soft rumors out there, but I think there's a really nice version of this. Let me pull up everyone's name too. The Mariners stable of pitchers, but when you go through and look at them, so they have basically four guys, and Brian Wu. Let me see if I can pull up really quick.
Yeah.
Is the youngest of the bunch, and he has the sort of the least amount proven, maybe not the highest ceiling of the group. He's not like an established star, but he's very clearly a mid or better rotation starter, young, years of control ahead of him from an organization that can otherwise backfill starting pitching that way, because young starting pitching is very valuable. So that's the type of guy I think could be the like sort of target that they're looking for. And again, you could look around the league and you could probably name 6 or 7 or 8 other guys kind of like him. Whereas it won't necessarily be the very best pitcher in somebody's rotation. Like, yeah, I'm trying to think. It's always hard to come up with the name off the top of your head, but you're not going to get obviously not Paul Skeens, but you're not even going to get like Jared Jones. Mm-hmm. Like, you know what I mean? Like Jared Jones is a star and he's just behind Paul Skeens. You know what I mean? Like, so it's kind of like, it's got to be someone more like Wu, whose upside is a little bit more capped, but a guy you'd be thrilled to have for the next several years. And who, even more importantly, I'll add, doesn't hurt if he can throw 95 or higher, like all of the Mariners pitchers can. And so I think that's a good quality to seek out when you're trying to come up with these names on your own. Is a hard throwing 25, 26 or younger starter with at least 3 years of team control remaining. And also likely approaching arbitration, if they're not already reaching there, but just about to approach it. That tends to help facilitate deals as teams want to offload some salary that is otherwise out of their control of handling. So that's sort of the thing.
And we keep on talking about the Mariners, but I mean, it just makes so much sense because their offense was miserable last year. And so if you give them anyone that has any sort of excitement on an offensive level, I just feel like there's an open conversation there. Here's a question I maybe should have started off with. You know, I think when you look at the numbers, the issue this last year was not starting pitching from the Cubs. So do you really, at your core, think that by going after starting pitching more than anything, that this is going to make this team better?
Yeah, I hear this question all the time. And I think when I say the following, you're going to go like, oh yeah, I guess that's true. Yeah, it wasn't a problem last year. Well, why does that mean it won't be next year? Like, of course it could be. It's starting pitching. And let's even take it a step further. Shota Imanaga had an incredible season. Yeah. Really, really good pitcher, but he also will be 1 whole year and a 32 or 29 starts worth of scouting reports behind.
Some regression you're expecting?
Yeah, because it would be absurd to expect not to. Because I mean, I think Javier Assad, his home road splits were significant, and I think that's an issue. And then, biggest and most importantly, unlike coming into this season where we did end up getting something out of Ben Brown and Jordan Wicks, I don't know exactly, and even Hayden Westesky at the time, those guys had serious injuries this year. Wicks, multiple injuries at various parts of his body. Brown, a neck injury that is very confusing and hard to understand exactly what's going on. And Cade Horton missed the rest of the season. And Kyle Hendricks, who wasn't good, but made 20 starts, whatever it was by the end of the year, is gone. Jamison Tyone had an incredible first half of the season. I feel like we kind of don't talk about that because starting at the deadline, his next like 4 or 5 starts were pretty bad. And then everyone stopped paying attention at the end when he bounced back a little bit. But are we assuming that he's going to be incredible again at the start of the year? I don't think that that's fair. Justin Steele had a hamstring injury. Like all of these things that you add up on top of the fact that Wrigley was notoriously pitcher friendly this year, not notoriously, infamously pitcher friendly, much more than it usually is. What happens if that swings around the other way? Because unlike other stadiums, it can vary. I think I went and looked in 2019, it had a park factor of like 123. 23% more hitter friendly. And then this year it was like the same magnitude, but the opposite way for pitchers. That's 3 or 4 years ago, So it's about wind when it comes to Wrigley Field. And so that could change dramatically. And so when you're talking about whether or not like that was the problem last year, no, it wasn't, but it could be this year. And so we need to buttress against that. But even underscoring all of this is the fact that it is the only obvious or easy or most direct path to add impact in some capacity. And there's no other real clear way to do it unless you find a way to trade for a stud catcher whom the position of which is almost never traded. It just doesn't happen very often. It does, Sean Murphy, but like it's and William Contreras was also traded in that deal, but he was like an afterthought at the time. No one knew he was going to. So like, if you're not going to add there, then where are you going to add? So that's sort of informing it as well. It's basically, that's why I think the rotation is where they'll target.
Yeah. And I mean, we haven't even talked about him yet, but I just have to believe that Jed is going to put so much effort into the Sasaki situation. I mean, it's cost effective, it's control, it's all the things that you would want. And let's just say that, he had some injuries this last year and he had some regression, but even that pitcher is better stuff wise than anyone on the Cubs right now, even with the regression. Why would you not go after this guy hard? And I mean, I know everyone keeps saying the Dodgers, but I really think that Jed is going to be like, no, this is our golden goose this offseason, and I'm going to put as much as I can into it while also trying to get some mid-level guys.
Yeah, I mean, I actually fully agree. I think Roki Sasaki is, if Jed Hoyer could close his eyes and make one player a Cub this offseason, I think it would be him. Not only because of him being so good and so young and so hard throwing, but also because he would be extremely cheap, which I'm not saying that to say that Jed Hoyer is cheap, is that it allows you to do other things, whereas adding the same level of talent from some other starting pitcher doesn't. It prevents you from doing it because the dollars are zero sum, whether they should be or not. And so, yeah, I think that that's the case. I think that they will try really hard. And I think that they have literally as good of a shot as any non-Dodgers team. On the flip side, I also, I know Roki can't get as much money from anyone as he can if he had waited a few years. But the Cubs also have extremely less money available. And the Dodgers have literally saved up seemingly for this exact pursuit. So it's kind of like, it's hard to sit down at two tables and look at Shohei Ohtani, Yoshinobu Yamamoto on a World Series trophy and the geographic advantages of LA and more money in terms of millions, or the Cubs and Shota and Suzuki, who are both awesome and less money and geographically less conducive to a Japanese player. Those are not really even offers, no matter how bad or how badly the Cubs want it. But all that aside, they did get those two guys. Shota and Suzuki were big deal free agents, and they got them. So
exactly. Well, and am I right that if he waits until January for the 2025 pool, then there's a lot more money out there, including from the Cubs. So are you saying from the money standpoint, the 2024 pool, or are you saying even in the 2025?
So it's sort of both. So if he, and I think he's going to be posted in a manner such that he can sign in either by his discretion. The Dodgers have more money in both already. Okay. The Cubs will have more in the latter period. So, which is after January 15th, I believe is when it is. And I think that if there's any chance the Cubs get him, it'll have to be in that second period. So, the longer it takes for him to be posted, the better, I guess, just because it kind of narrows the time before that first period ends. But he'll be posted before. I mean, I'm guessing the end of this month is when he'll actually be posted. But anyway, yeah, I mean, I think that the money will never equal that for the Cubs. Oh, this is the point I was going to make. I was stalling because I couldn't remember. I think the Cubs also have, and this is always a little unclear, and I'm doing a little bit of extrapolation based on what I've read and understand. But they also, the way these international deals work is you often have these arrangements set up ahead of time, and they're just executed in the period under which they can be accommodated. So you might know, okay, we're going to sign these 5 guys on January 16th. And they're going to account for, and from what I understand, the Cubs do have some of those already set up for the next period. Would they squash them all for Sasaki? Yeah, probably they
For
would,
sure.
but
Yeah.
that's just another little bit of a, like, that's a big giant field where relationships and agreements that are handshake agreements do matter. And so that's at least another variable that's not exactly working in favor of the Cubs.
Yeah, well, I think the key word here is relationship, and I just really cannot imagine Sasaki not at least considering the Cubs based on Shota, based on Seiya, and the wild card that we haven't talked about, Yu Darvish, right? He
Oh
looks
yeah.
up to Yu Darvish, and Yu Darvish has nothing but amazing things to say about Chicago. If I remember correctly, I think Seiya reached out to you
Mm-hmm.
when he was considering the Cubs.
But the
The
problem
only
there is that the Padres are also a
sure.
contender for Sasaki.
But my question, and I don't even know what Yu's contract is, but I mean he's getting up there in age, and Sasaki's going to be at whatever team for 6 years. Does he make a decision based on if Yu is only there for another year or two? Like I don't
Oh,
know if that's
sure.
a smart decision.
No, that's a
Yeah,
good call. I mean, I guess I would just say that in terms of like the reputational advantage that Yu Darvish can lend credence to for the Cubs being a good place or a
yeah.
welcoming place, or Chicago being a welcoming place for Japanese players. But again, I think you're right, and I think that the Cubs have tried very hard to make themselves a desirable landing spot for Japanese stars, because, like we've seen with Shota and Seiya, those guys are good. Like, it is not this. It's not. It's not that it's not as big of a question. I think we've become more sophisticated in being able to identify which players and skill sets will translate a little bit better. It
Mhm.
just seems like these guys are hitting at a higher frequency than they
Right.
did 10, 15 years ago. So the Cubs prioritizing that path is smart, and hopefully, I mean, if it pays off, if it happens with Sasaki, every dollar they spend on Shota and Seiya will be even more worth it than it already is for both of those guys.
Right now, where this team is at, let's just assume going into opening day in Japan, everything is the exact same as it currently is on the 26-man roster. The only difference is that you have Roki Sasaki. Where would you put this team projection win-wise right now as is, which I imagine would probably be in the same range that they've been the last 2 years, 83 to 85 wins? And where would you put this team if they had Sasaki on it?
I mean, I think in terms of projection, with even with Sasaki, you're probably like 86. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Which obviously isn't exactly where we want to be, but I do think, and I hate that you're making me say this so early in the offseason. Brett and I talk about this all the time, and we kind of laugh, right? If you I mean, if you look around the roster and bullpen notwithstanding, because that does need to be addressed in one way or another. I think it will. Um, it's not hard to see a good team. It's just not. It sucks that we have to say that, because I don't want to. I don't think we should settle for a good team or a hard to see good
Mhm.
team. But like the second half of the season, they were good, and that was mostly the group that is coming back, and it includes PCA in a full time competent role. It also includes, again, I feel like we're sleeping on this. Say DHing like 99% of the time. I think
Yeah,
that makes a huge difference for him. He's a
huge
guy who's
difference.
dealt with a ton of injuries. Maybe that's all the difference in the world from him being a good hitter to being like a star hitter, which he has the
And if you
capacity
look
to
at his
be.
numbers when he only DH'd, they were head and shoulders above better.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. And then I also think Cody Bellinger was. I think Scott Boras is kind of right. I think he was just a little bit dinged by a terrible hitting environment at Wrigley this year, which is not guaranteed to be matched in 2025. So I don't think this is a terrible team. I just think that I'm sick of not going into the season with 90 plus
Sure.
win expectations, which, again, I know that's hard to achieve, but that's what I want. So, like, why do I have to settle for? Yeah, I could believe it's going to be good. even though
Yeah.
that is what I believe.
I mean, let's end this with a little bit of optimism because we're in the last few minutes here. Just to your point, right? Like in the outfield, you already mentioned this is going to be one of the best defensive outfields if Cody Bellinger is healthy, right? Whereas Seiya was, even though he's a Gold Glover in the MPB, I think we see the difference in MPV versus MLB. On the infield, you're going into the year with a third baseman that you can say what you want about Isak Paredes when he was with the Cubs. He has the track record of being a solid defender. Dansby is going to do his thing. Nico is going to do his thing when he's healthy. And then Michael Busch coming into year 2. And then the only thing that like you would really like to see some major improvement on and to work on the offseason would be Miguel Amaya and his throwing abilities and actually throwing guys out. I've done a lot of research here, Michael. I want Christian Bethancourt back because I look at the field and I just think look at Carson Kelly, for example. Christian Bethancourt was basically the same offensive player as Carson Kelly when he was with the Cubs, but he throws out guys at about the same, if not a higher rate. And he's going to be a lot cheaper. And so I'm just like, there's not much out there, but if you can keep Christian Bethancourt and then Moises Ballesteros maybe has some positives, bring him up. But why wouldn't this team win more even just as is, especially if healthy? And I mean, that was the biggest thing in 2024 to me. And you can look at all the excuses. Boog and I talked about it. The Dodgers had the most injuries of all teams and the depth showed because they won the World Series. But if you just even had 2 or 3 of those injuries not happen. And I think of Ben Brown and Julian Merriweather, the ones that come to mind. If those don't happen, I mean, this is probably a much more serious wild card contender.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, it's almost right up there too with, in a convoluted way, Elzalai, because does it not seem at least plausible now that his issues were
already
injury related?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like the precursors to it popping and everything going, like that's an injury effect as well. Not just missing guys, but guys playing well below their capabilities. And he obviously cost the Cubs a ton of games early on. So, but to your point, yeah, Julian Merriweather is there to step up earlier. That's a big deal. And Ben Brown, who, man, I mean, he was looking great as a starter and as a reliever. He could have helped in completely different ways. And I also am like, I feel like I'm the crazy man on the island that I think Jordan Wicks is great. I know what his ERA is. I trust my eyes when I see him and I see a quality 3 or 4 pitcher who's 26 and has upside remaining. Like right now, that's a valuable, useful guy, and he was just not there for like the majority of the year.
It was wild to me, Michael, because I went to spring training and I covered out there leading up to games. Every time Jordan Wicks was doing a live BP session, that was the most swing and misses I saw during that time. He looked like a number 1 out there. I know he doesn't have
incredible.
Yeah.
I totally agree. Seriously, we saw his movement was up, his velocity was up, and he's got excellent command and a lot of pitches. Like he was already going to be a fine pitcher before he improved his stuff, and then he did. And it was like, holy cow, this is a different guy.
Yeah. 100%. I think where I stand on that is just, I would like to see him being the number 6 starter, right? Like, let's not go into the year thinking he's part of the rotation. Let's make him a swingman, kind of the role that you wanted to see Assad in 2024, but he was forced into the rotation. I would love to see Wicks be that guy and, hey, build it up 2-3 innings. And then when a starter goes down, we're going to slot him in and he's going to start. And then maybe he reclaims the position.
This is exactly what I'm saying to add 2 starters, because if Assad and Wicks are your 6 and 7, who, for the record, your 6th and 7th starter get a ton of starts every year. It is 2024 turning 2025. There's not 5-man rotations anymore. It's just it's a 5-man, but there are going to be a ton of starts available. So if you had 2 guys to steal Shota and Tyone, then you're talking, because your 6th and 7th starter are quality starters with upside who can otherwise help, in the bullpen in the meantime.
Well, I apologize for making you talk about projections already here in just November, but that's something that's on our minds, right? Yeah. And it's going to be on our minds continually until camp breaks, and honestly, even until March, because we saw signings happening while at spring training last year. So, Michael Cerami, thank you so much, man. Great conversation, and let's see what happens. What is on Jed's agenda for this offseason?
Looking forward to it, and thanks for having me on.